You may recall from the What is Dungeon Builder tutorial this graphic here. And one of the things that this graphic conveys is that time can play a central role in the Dungeon Builder environment. In this tutorial, we'll explore this role and how it can affect the flow of actions within your adventures. Now, there are 4 things you should know about time. First of all, Dungeon Builder comes with a game clock. Secondly, the game clock is only active during a session. That is, it's only active when you're in play mode. It's not present when you're in draw mode. Third, when you are in play mode, you don't have to use the game clock. It's optional. We strongly recommend that you do for reasons we'll discuss in a moment, but you don't have to use it. And finally, game time is not restricted to a given session. The game clock will carry over the current settings from one session to the next if you want it to, but you can also reset it to 0 if you choose to. Let's now talk about these topics in a little bit more depth. Now, ordinarily, the game clock is found over here on the Tools pane. You can see there's a header here for game or real-time alarms, but there's really only widgets for setting real-time alarms. There's basically nothing here dealing with game time. And the reason why is because we're in draw mode. We're not in a session. Now, if I were to start an adventure, the game clock will appear. And I will start this Barrow Whites session. And Dungeon Builder will go through some gyrations here. And one of those is to reveal the game time clock. Notice how the game time seems to be structured into a bunch of blue boxes here, which segments time into year, month, day, turnaround segments, etc. Well, this is what we call fantasy role-playing time. And you can increment any one of these segments. For example, I can increment rounds by using the up arrow, okay? Or I can increment segments by using the plus key on my keyboard. You can also use the shift plus key if you have a laptop, or if you have one of those number pads, you can use the plus key on it as well. So incrementing time is pretty straightforward. Now, what's interesting about these time segments here, and I'm not referring to segments, the unit of time, but into the segmentation of time that's shown up here on a game time, is that they roll over to the next higher level. So segments roll over to rounds, rounds to turns, etc. And the convention we use is that 10 segments make a round, 10 rounds make a turn, 6 turns make an hour, 24 hours make a day, 30 days make a month, and 12 months make a year. Pretty straightforward stuff. But this is actually what we call the game time adjustment clock. It's not actually the true game time. The true game time is found down here in these red letters. You see that? And the reason why is that while the game adjustment time will more often than not be the same as the game running position, that's not always the case. And the reason why is that when you make small time changes, like I'll make, 5 rounds. Okay, there's 5 rounds. Dungeon Builder waits for a moment to make sure that you're done making your changes and then automatically commits the time change to the running position. You see, we're now in sync here. But if I were to make a larger time change, say 4 turns, Dungeon Builder is going to think about that and ask me if I really want to do that. See, it sends me this confirmation prompt here, okay? And right now, my game time from an incremental standpoint is different than my running position. Now, if I were to accept this, then the two would get into sync. But I can also decline it. I'll increment this 4 more turns, wait for my prompt, and then decline it, and the blue time drops back to the running position time. And the reason why we have this conscious decision between whether we want to commit that time or not is because it can have a dramatic effect upon encounters, okay, random monster encounters. It can also affect your game time alarm significantly. Now you may be wondering, hold on, we just made a large time change. I'll make 4 more turns, okay? And while it asked us whether we wanted to commit the time change, which we do, it didn't seem to generate any encounters. And that's right, it didn't. And the reason why is that we're not in a dungeon level. See, right now, Dungeon Builder doesn't know what map we're on, so therefore it doesn't know what dungeon encounter table to use. But that all changes when we open up a dungeon. And I'm going to open up the Barrow Downs dungeon here. Go to the first level. And now notice what happens when I make that 4-turn change. 1, 2, 3, 4. First, I'll be queried as to whether I want to make that time change. I'll say OK. And guess what? Dungeon Builder rolled 6 encounters in those 4 turns. And I can look at those if I want to, and there are the 6 encounters, which I'm not going to play with. So do you see how that works? Now, you may be wondering, what happens if I were to increment like, 4 months? What would that do? Well, theoretically, that will commit many thousands, hundreds of thousands of rounds, which will probably generate hundreds to thousands of encounters. But we put in a fail-safe to make sure that only 20 of those encounters are actually generated. Because if we rolled up all those encounters, not only would it be unmanageable for you to play them, but it would also tie up the server for everyone else. So I'll say, okay, I'll commit those 4 months. And guess what? Dungeon Builder determined that in that period of time, there were some, 8,928 encounters rolled, but you can only see the top 20 encounters. And there they are, okay? So don't worry about making large time changes. We'll be able to catch it. And one last point on the clock here is that you can't go back in time. You cannot use the minus sign or the down arrow keys to back up your clock. Now you can reset the clock by clicking on the reset button, but the game clock is not a time machine. You can't go back in time. Time only presently goes forward in Dungeon Builder. It doesn't go backwards. Now, another way you can increment the game clock is to place the party icon on the map and then to move it. As we discussed in the maps tutorial, one of the great features of Dungeon Builder is the ability to move icons on the dungeon map and to have that movement increment the game clock automatically. And I'll put the party icon here in room 0. Dungeon Builder goes through its gyrations. And there's the party icon. Okay, so we're at 4 months, 1 hour, 6 turns, 9 rounds. If I were to move this to this room, in 5, and the time on the game adjustment clock has advanced, and then I'm asked if I want to commit those 12 rounds to the game time running position, which I'll say okay, and now the 2 clocks are in sync. It also rolled up an encounter, which I'm going to cancel out of. And the reason this happens this way is that we have a default movement rate associated with the party icon. And because we know the distance moved on the map, as well as the movement rate of the party, we can back out of that how much time should be applied to the game clock. Now you may have noticed that a prompt came up here just a moment ago. I'll move the party icon back to show that prompt. And this prompt doesn't have to deal with making a large time change. This is a prompt about whether you want to display to the players who may be in the session the change in position of the party icon. It's completely different from the time change itself. Now, Dungeon Builder will check for a large time change as well, and if appropriate, provide you that warning prompt as well. And in this particular case, it does not. But previously, when I did that first movement of the party icon, it did ask me if I wanted to make that 12-round change to the game clock. And one last change that's probably fairly obvious is that if you uncheck the check encounters and you increase the game clock either directly or using the party icon, no encounters will be checked for. Okay, so I just made a huge change, and guess what? It just automatically was populated to the game clock. So let's now take a look at the alarms that are down here. And as you can see, we can create and administer both game time and real-time alarms. To create game time alarms, you just click on this little button here, and a dialog is presented that allows you to configure your alarm. You enter the title of your alarm, and I'm going to say, for example, that we're going to have the torches go out after 30 minutes. And how you configure that is that you specify the time increment between the current time and the time when you want the alarm to go off. So here's my current time, and I want this to go off in 3 turns from the current time. And then I'll click Save. And I'm going to enter a couple others here. I'm going to have a flying potion expires, and that goes off in 1 turn, 5 rounds. And I'm going to have another one for spell expires, and that's going to be in 8 rounds. Now to see the alarms I've just set, I just click on this Manage Game Time Alarms, and up comes a screen that shows me the 3 alarms that I just set. It lists them in the order of that which is going to expire first on top and that which is going to expire last on the bottom. Now you can delete individual alarms if you want to, or if you click on this trash can, you can delete all the alarms all at once. But there's no warning prompt, there's no confirmation prompt if you click on this trash can. So when you do that, you're going to lose everything. So think about it before you do that. But to test this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increment the game clock 2 turns. And that should cause 2 of my game time alarms to expire. We'll test that out. And I have to commit that time for it to be applied to the game time alarms. It generates some encounters. I'm going to ignore that. And there are the 2 alarms that expire. And if I go back and check my alarms, I should have one that's still present. Yes, the torches still have one turn to go. Pretty neat, huh? Now, as you would expect, real-time alarms work a little differently. You create them by clicking on the same Add Alarm button, but instead of specifying the interval between the current time and the alarm time, you instead specify the actual date time that you want the alarm to go off. So I'm going to pick this calendar widget here, and I'm going to have it go off tomorrow at, say, 5 a.m. and say I'm done, and it will lock it in. Now, as with game time alarms, you can manage your real-time alarms up here by deleting them individually or deleting them all at once. And that really is it on alarms. The one final note I want to make here is that when alarms expire, they are not saved. They're just deleted from the system. So you can't go back and research all of your old expired alarms. Once they're gone, they're gone. And that's all I wanted to cover on this tutorial. Thanks for watching.